I left a senior corporate role for fractional work, and I did it without a plan. Now, I knew that I had a general direction of travel. I knew the kind of area that I wanted to work within, and I knew that I wanted to have my own business. And so I definitely had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I didn't have a specific month by month plan. And so this video is what I would have liked to have gotten as a month by month roadmap before I took the leap and moved into entrepreneurship and setting up my own fractional business. And so my intention is for this to really be practical. And if you're somebody who's considering fractional work, but perhaps you're not yet ready to pull the trigger, this gives you concrete and specific steps that you can take while still in employment so that when you do make the transition, you're making the transition informed, well planned, and you don't have to fret about your finances and you don't have to worry about your sanity. Everything will work out the way it's meant to. If we haven't met before, my name is Ada Ofonri. Have been in executive search for over 20 years in London, in Chicago, in New York. And in that time, I've coached hundreds and thousands of senior executives on their career transitions. I'm now running my own fractional practice and talent advisory firm. Now, let's dig into where people tend to go wrong when it comes to moving from a corporate role, a full-time corporate role into fractional. The first trap is the fantasy leap. If you look at LinkedIn, everywhere people romanticize quitting from your 9 to 5 job. And they'll talk about taking the leap. And if you follow this, you'll think that courage is all that's needed to make a successful transition. And the reality is that courage without a plan is just expensive, and you can't afford to do that if you're mid-career and you have real responsibilities. The second trap is waiting until you're ready. A lot of people tend to think that there'll be a perfect set of circumstances before it makes sense for them to move into fractional work. And the reality is that, you don't need for the perfect conditions to exist. If you're no longer growing, you're no longer happy, you're no longer satisfied with the work you're doing, you're not interested in the work that you're doing, that might be a sign to move on to do something else. Or if you're just finding it really stressful, you don't need to wait for perfect circumstances. I think you know that people tend to wait for perfect circumstances because a lot of people tend to consider going fractional after a redundancy or after a bad quarter. The best time to plan your exit is when you don't necessarily need to move on, but you know what's kind of coming down the line in a few years' time. The third trap that people tend to fall into is treating fractional like freelancing. Freelancing is selling your time, fractional is selling your leadership and selling your judgment. And so, if you price yourself like a contractor, you'll be treated like one. And so, when you're moving into fractional work, there's a positioning and mindset distinction that matters enormously. And then trap number four, and I have to say this is the one that I have struggled with the most, is underestimating the identity crisis. The reality is that by the time you move into fractional work, you've likely been in your career for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, etc. And so when someone asks what you do at a dinner party, I would say I'm head of talent, for a hedge fund. And when that's gone, it's harder than people expect, right? You really need to be ready for that. And you really have to think about what it is you do, how that impacts your identity, how you present yourself in situations where you could hide behind your corporate title. You no longer have that to hide behind. So, we'll talk more about that. So, you're somebody who thinks, you know what? I like the sound of this fractional stuff. It's something that I might want to do in the next year or two. I'm not ready now, but it's something that I want to do in future. Here are a few things that you should be doing. Certainly, once you've made the decision for from month 0 to month 6, and this is why you're still in your full-time job, you need to focus on the shadow build. Now, what do I mean when I talk about the shadow build? This is work that you do before anybody knows that you're planning to leave. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that you're moonlighting in a complete different job or that you breach your contract if you're not, meant to have, meant to have more than your full-time role. This is where you're strategically investing in your future self. So let's talk about some of the components of the shadow build. The first is you audit your network with intention. So, I often say to people, open up a spreadsheet or Google Sheets and think about 50 people in your network who run a business and who might need fractional leadership or have invested in businesses or are fractional leaders themselves or are leaders in small companies that small, medium sized, large companies, whatever the size, that might need fractional work. And what you're doing here is you're starting a universe. You're not selling to them yet. You're just being strategic about the people who are in your network who could be potential partners or referrers or clients. And you start connecting with them. So you're going for coffees, you're going for drinks after work, you're catching up over Zoom, you're having, what are you working on conversations? How are things going for you? So you're not talking about your impending fractional work, you're not talking about any of that. You're just kind of reconnecting. It's a really good way to warm up your network. And regardless of whether you're interested in fractional work or not, this is something that you should be doing anyway in the corporate sphere. And it's an area that people underestimate. But people who are really good at it never really struggle with their job search. So something to consider there. So shadow build, part number one, audit your network, have your list of 50 people who could be potential clients and referrers and partners. The second thing I'm an advocate for is to start creating content. Now, this is the bit that many people tend to be nervous about because, you don't necessarily want to talk about your fractional work or your sudden interest in fractional work. You don't want to signal that you're looking for something else, etc. But as senior people, execs, experienced people, you definitely have a right to showcase your expertise. In today's world, if you're not showcasing your expertise in some way or another, if you're a programmer, you need to be showcasing your expertise on GitHub, for example. If you're not showcasing your expertise in some way, then you might potentially be missing out on opportunities that your peers are able to command because they're a bit more visible. So, you want to be sharing insights on your current domain. So, for example, if you're a CFO, you might want to be posting about financial strategy, commenting on news articles that address financial strategy by sharing your perspective on those articles. If you're in talent, like I am, you might be sharing hiring market observations. And so you're just kind of building your authority as a subject matter expert. And this creates a foundation so that when you do announce your fractional expertise, you're not necessarily starting from zero. Now, shadow work number 3 is having strategic conversations. And I'm not referring to sales pitches here. But, if you are somebody that has access to founders and CEOs and investors in your network or leaders in your network, you want to be having strategic conversations with them. So trying to understand some of the biggest leadership gaps that they're experiencing, some of the key problems that they're facing right now. That is your market research, right? Because those conversations will eventually become your pipeline. And then the last thing you want to be doing during the shadow build phase is definitely check your employment contract. Be clear on your non-compete period if you have that, your gardening leave, your non-solicits. notice periods, IP clauses, all of those kind of things, and know exactly what you can and can't do before you do anything formal. And if you need to get legal advice, this is not something that you definitely want to wing. And so you want to be clear that you have all your ducks in a row before you even consider pulling the trigger, assuming you're still in a full-time role. So we've talked about the shadow build. The next thing to then look at is building a financial fortress. Now, money is typically the key reason why people don't take a leap or make a transition into any kind of other career or job. But in this case, we're talking about fractional work. And, I guess the reason why I'm an advocate for building a financial fortress, apart from the fact that it's purely logical, is that it removes the fear and panic that usually stops people in their tracks when it comes to making these sort of career moves. So and you want to kind of remove money as a source of fear so that you can make decisions from a position of strength rather than from a position of desperation. So when I'm talking about building a financial fortress, let's break this down a little bit. So first thing I'd say is calculate your bare bones number. This is your survival number. So what you need for your mortgage or for your rent, your utilities, food, insurance, kids' fees, kids' extracurricular activities, debt repayments, the absolute minimum amount that you need each month to ensure that all your bills are paid and you're fed and you can sleep well at night. So write that down. That is your floor. Then you need to calculate your comfortable number. So, this is bare bones plus the things that keep you sane. So this might be your gym membership, your monthly massages, your vacation, your eating out, being able to buy that new Chloe bag that has been released. So the gap between this bare bones number that I talked about and this comfortable number is your stress zone, right? So you want to avoid operating in your stress zone for as long as you can. And so, that gives you a bit of a cushion where you can still enjoy the nice things in life as you build. You need to be able to sustain yourself during that transition. So once you figured out your bare bones number and your comfortable number, then you want to build a 9 to 12 month runway at your comfortable number. So not 3 months, not 6 months. People often underestimate how long it takes to build a true body of fractional work that you're comfortable with. So give yourself, a lot of room to maneuver. 9 to 12. 9 is the minimum, ideally 12. Your first fractional client might take a few months to land. Payment terms might be 30 to 60 days. You might have a slow first quarter. So a 9 to 12 month runway means you never have to make any decisions based on desperation. You never have to take on a bad client because of money. Your runway is really your negotiation power. And again, ensuring that you're operating from a place of strength. And then you should also have a red line number. So this is a number that you decide upon in advance, and it's at which point you might want to consider pivoting. So it might be that at this point you decide, you know what, I'm going to take on a contract or I'm going to go back into full-time work. For many people, that's sort of 3 to 4 months of savings remaining. You've got to decide this now so that you're not panicking at 2 a.m. with a month saving left in your bank account. And I think that operating in this way is quite strategic rather than reactionary or defeatist. And it gives you confidence because you know that, okay, this is my solid runway period. This is the period in which I need to maybe broaden my horizons and consider what else I need to do so that I don't completely blitz through my savings. And then the last, not the last thing actually, The fifth thing is you probably want to cut the lifestyle creep before you leave. So you know how it is. You know, you're earning the big corporate salary and you've probably, adjusted your spending to expand into the salary that you have. There are probably loads of subscriptions that you don't necessarily need to keep. So this is a good time to start trimming all of those things. And by no means am I saying don't get your coffee, your daily coffee, if that's something that you do. But you know what I mean? The kind of excesses that you know that you're not necessarily using. So, you can get used to a leaner version of life before the runway financial runway that you've created is good practice. It helps you build up your runway faster. It helps you, build up a larger financial runway as well. And then, before you think of leaving your job, definitely look into all of the kind of boring financial and operational stuff that you need to run a business effectively. So your life insurance, your medical insurance, income protection insurance, pension contributions, tax efficient savings. Speak to an accountant, speak to a financial advisor, understand what you need to do to set up your limited company or equivalent. It's better to kind of make all of these arrangements when you still have a pay slip and when you still have income coming in, and you're just kind of hedging your situation. I would say that in kind of making my move, I followed all of this. I had a red line number, a bare bones number. I had a comfortable number. I built a year long runway. I think that cutting the lifestyle creep was probably the bit that I've struggled with. So not struggled with, but sometimes I kind of go between thinking I could be tighter on some areas too. I want to enjoy the journey and I don't want to feel like, I'm struggling in order to kind of build the business that I'm building. But, you use your best judgment and do what kind of works best for you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about pricing and packaging at a high level. I'm going to cover this in more detail in another video because I know that it is something that a lot of people struggle with. The thing I would say from my conversations with a bunch of fractional executives is that they massively underprice themselves because they tend to anchor their pricing to their old salary divided by hours. And I think that that's the wrong maths. You're not selling time, you're selling outcome, you're selling experience, you're selling speed and judgment. And so how you sort of package your services differs, right? So you have the salary trap where sometimes, let's say, for example, you earn £200,000 as a corporate exec. Your instinct might think, okay, that's roughly £100 an hour. So I'll charge £150 an hour for my services as a fractional executive. But you've got to remember that in addition to the 200K you are getting in cash, you are getting a pension contribution probably, you're getting health insurance likely, perhaps you're getting bonuses on top of that, maybe some equity, paid holiday, sick pay, you probably had office space already, laptop, phone. Someone else was doing all the kind of admin stuff. Maybe you had an executive assistant. So, the true cost to your employer for your 200K salary was probably 300, 400K. And so as a fractional, you're covering all of that yourself, right? Plus, you've now got business development and networking time, plus your admin, plus the risk premium of not having guaranteed income. So you've got to factor all of these things when you think about what your pricing needs to be. I think that a good way to think about pricing is to work backwards from what you need to earn annually and then factor in that only about 60 to 70% of your time, if that, will be billable. The rest of your time will be spent on networking, business development, marketing, slash content creation, learning, admin, operations, etc. So if you need to earn, say, 200,000, then 65% of that time is billable. So you need to generate 310,000 in revenue, spread that across a number of retainer clients, and then you've got your pricing. Now, I think a question that sometimes people have when it comes to pricing for fractional work is, should I use a day rate or should I use, a monthly rate? My view is that day rates tend to put you in the consultant box, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of consultants that are doing really good work, earning really good money. It's just a different model. And so I would say that monthly retainers are what kind of signal an ongoing leadership relationship. They also give you predictable income, right? Which matters massively for your mental health, for your nervous system being calm when you're making this kind of transition. And so, I'd say that typically fractional exec retainers range from 5 to 20K per month, depending on your seniority, depending on the specific function that you're in, and the time commitment to the organization that you're working with. The other thing I would say when it comes to pricing is focus on outcome, not on the number of hours you put into it. At this time, again, you've built up a body of work, a number of years of experience. So whether it takes you 2 minutes or 20 minutes or 20 hours, if the outcome significantly shifts the client in terms of their talent or income or cost or whatever it might be, then that's what the client is really paying for. So, a 10K retainer per month, for example, for strategic talent leadership, including building hiring infrastructure, managing the first sort of 2, 3 critical hires, and coaching the internal team. The deliverables are clear, the value is obvious, the hours are irrelevant. You might want to give clients a guide because everyone's still kind of anchored to time as opposed to outcome. But remember, you have an opportunity to kind of re-educate about focusing on outcome. Now, some people might have a flat fee that they charge and arrange and a service that they offer to their prospective clients. I have a 3-tier model. I think you can sort of figure out what works for you based on the type of fractional leader that you are and the sort of clients that you're going after. So typically, tier 1 tends to be advisory only. So this is, you might have monthly strategy sessions, asynchronous support, light touch. Tier 2 tends to be more embedded leadership. So at this point, you're attending meetings, you're managing functions, you're making, important strategic decisions. And then tier 3 tends to be full fractional C-suite. So this is maybe you're an interim exec or a part-time exec working with that organization. And, each tier deserves a different pricing point. So it makes your pitches and your sales conversations a bit easier because you're offering a choice, right? Not a binary, yes or no. Then the last thing I'd say when it comes to pricing is this is not about racing to the bottom, right? Oftentimes, because people are so keen to secure that first client or the first few clients, that they add a bunch of, add a bunch of discounts, and then it means that you've anchored the client at a really low point, and so you're trying to basically bump up the client with every subsequent negotiation that follows, and sometimes you don't necessarily have the leverage to be able to do that. So if you start, for example, at 5K and the market rate is at 12K, and then you need to spend months or years trying to climb back up to 12K, it's a shame because that means a lot of work where you're being paid below your worth. So start where the market needs to be. If you don't get the client at that rate, then you focus on better positioning, focus on, being able to pitch yourself a bit better and being able to close better. I'm not saying don't give discounts, obviously use your discretion, but just be aware that you need to be paid your worth and you're not necessarily trying to close a client at a lower point than the market rate. So let's talk about something that is near and dear to my heart when it comes to transitioning from full-time jobs to fractional work. And this is the identity shift that occurs. This is the part that nobody warns you about because everybody's, focused on the practicalities and the tactical steps that you need to take to transition from full-time work to fractional work. It's the bit that everyone underestimates. And this is about, the identity shift is real. This is, when you're transitioning from a full-time role, it's not just a business change, it's the identity shift is significant. And If you're somebody who's gone through an identity shift, you will know that this is one of the most uncomfortable things that you can go through. Um, so for example, if somebody asks, what do you do? If you're somebody who's been a CFO for a media company, very simple. Most of us tend to hide behind our titles. I'm the CFO for a media company, right? Instant credibility, instant context. Nobody needs to ask any follow-up questions. It's all kind of straightforward. But when you move into fractional work, there's more discomfort, right? Because how you describe yourself to others is really how you think about yourself. So think about what your story is going to be, how you're going to describe the work that you do and what that you do. The other thing when it comes to my identity shifts is moving from an employee to a business owner. This is the shift that catches even the most prepared, smartest people off guard. You're no longer excelling in a specific function. You're no longer getting external validation and external accountability. You're the CEO of a business that sells your specific function, whether that's in sales or marketing or operations or talent or finance, etc. All of it is on you. So you need to get comfortable with that, and also get help in the parts that you're not necessarily very good at. The other thing when it comes to this identity shift is that loneliness is real. Corporate life, even if you're the most frustrated person in the office, at least there are people to have lunch with. You're going to bump into people as you're making your coffee. There's Slack channels, and some of the jokes in those Slack channels are fantastic. I would laugh a minute sometimes based on some of the gags in Slack channels. You've got someone to debrief with after a hard meeting. You have someone to bounce ideas off of if you're not really sure about how you want to tackle a piece of work. So going fractional can be incredibly isolating, right? Because especially in your first few months when you're still trying to find your tribe of other people, of peers who are doing similar things, and you're trying to find your footing, it can be really tough. This is why community really matters. Finding other fractional leaders who understand what it is you're going through, can make suggestions, can give you tips on what they did. And I think all of this helps with your mental health overall. So very, very important. The other thing when it comes to identity shifts you need to be aware of is the comparison trap. At this point, your former peers are probably getting promoted, getting more bonuses, making more money. They're posting about their teams, they're posting about big deals, they're posting about company events, international travel, and you're sitting in your home office with your dog running in and out of your office, and you're wondering if anybody's going to respond to your LinkedIn message. You've sent 50 out over the past couple of days and nobody has responded. Just realize that it's normal, it's part of the course when you're building, and you need to recognize that it's happening and not let you doubt your overall decision. You've also got to redefine success, right? As your identity shifts, you've got to redefine success. So in the corporate world, success is about titles, team size, compensation, promotion, all of these things. As fractional, success is multidimensional. So you're not just looking at your income, but you're looking at the flexibility, the variety of work, the autonomy, the impact that you're having across multiple organizations, the increased time, hopefully, that you can spend with your family. For some people, it might not be more time, it's just more flexible time. You can, go to your daughter's play and your son's football game. You've got creative freedom. You can express yourself in multiple ways, particularly, I love this, especially around my content creation and marketing. And so you need to be very conscious about building a new scorecard for yourself. If you constantly measure yourself against your old scorecard, it might feel like you're losing. If your primary way of measuring yourself is income, and in your first 3 to 6 months you haven't met your income goals, or you haven't matched what you would have had in a full-time role, it can feel like you're losing. But you've got to have these other metrics to sort of score yourself against, and it gives you a total view of where you are. And I think also the other thing to think about when it comes to the identity shift is, in a world where people are always striving for the next thing and the next milestone and the next rung of the ladder, when is it all enough, right? So when you move into your fractional business, when do you feel you've got enough clients? When do you feel you've got enough income? When do you feel you've got enough work? I think that that's a really tough thing to decide upon, but at the same time, it's also quite liberating because, you can do this intentionally and really kind of decide what your boundaries are and what your measures are and what your standards are. So it can be fantastic from that perspective. As somebody who works as an executive coach, I've sat with hundreds of senior leaders navigating this type of transition. And the ones who struggle the most, it's not about business skill, it's not about experience, it's the one who haven't necessarily done the inner work of letting go of their old identity and being comfortable with the messy middle where your new identity hasn't quite formed, and consciously understanding that this is a process and that what's at the other side of it is this new identity that you're forming. So, I think when people keep going, you find yourself almost kind of going back in a loop. If you've done something for 10, 15, 20 years, that's natural. You keep going back to the way in which you measured yourself. You've got to train yourself, retrain yourself to think about things in a completely different way. So we've talked about the shadow build, we've talked about the financial runway, we've talked about the identity shift. Let's talk about, all of this takes time, right? This will take you 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months or 2 years, depending on how much of a financial runway you want to build, depending on how you're feeling about your current role. If you're feeling okay in it, maybe you can stay a bit longer to be able to really kind of get all your ducks in a row. So you've done all of that. Let's talk about the launch window. This is so exciting. You have been working towards this for a long time. At this point, you've built up your network, you secured your finances, you've worked out your pricing, you started doing your identity work. This is about choosing the exact moment when you want to kind of launch your fractional business. I think that before you do that, walk through a mental checklist, right? So have I got the financial runway for 9 to 12 months at my comfortable number? If yes, fantastic. Do I have a few warm conversations lined up with potential clients because I was spending time nurturing my network all of this time? And I don't need them to be signed deals. I just need them to be people who've expressed genuine interest in working with me. Fantastic. Can I articulate exactly what my offer is and what my pricing is without hesitating? You've got to practice this. If you stumble, you need more practice, right? You need to practice until it's natural. Um, what about support system? Does your partner, does your inner circle know what you're doing and support it? Fractional life will have wobbly months, right? Months where you're up and down. So you need people who won't panic, who will support you, who will back you. Really important. Legal readiness, do you know what you need to do to set up your company, have insurance in place, have all your contract templates ready, accountant briefed, all of those things. And identity, if you're to introduce yourself to a dinner party, can you not use your job title and not lean on, oh, I used to be X, focus on, the direction that you're moving into. So, when you've done all of that, then that helps you understand if you need to make a go, no go decision. So, assuming it's go, you've ticked all the boxes, fantastic. I would say that you need to time your exit and your resignation strategically, right? Think about bonus cycles, vesting schedules, notice periods, even the hiring market. So, if you're leaving in January after bonuses have been paid out versus leaving in August when a lot of people are on vacation, that might impact how you navigate the market. It might be that, you want to leave in June and take the other, the rest of the year off and then start in the new year, whatever, right? But be very practical about timing and really give it a lot of thought. As much as you can control it, leave well, right? So your current employer could be a future client, a future referral, at the very least, a reputation reference, right? So don't burn bridges, be generous about your handover, be gracious. It's not necessarily about what people deserve, but it's about the kind of legacy you want to leave. And the people who you're working with now will remember how you left, not just how you worked when you were there. So really, really important. And then have your announcement ready, right? Has it really happened if it's not on LinkedIn? So you need to be clear about your positioning, your launch message, the day of your departure, the day that your departure becomes public. You might not want to make people, make people aware of this initially, but when you're ready, the day it goes public, you need to really be clear about what you're doing next, so that you can build momentum from that post. And then, remember all those coffees and, conversations, Zoom calls, meetups that you would have done in the shadow building phase one. This is an exciting time to follow up. And you can now set up conversations where you talk exactly about your offer. At this point, the relationships are hopefully warm. So once you started your fractional business, you need to really come out all guns blazing, right? So I tend to work in 90-day sprints, and I find that this helps me to be able to really figure out what's working. It's long enough to figure out what's working, but short enough where you can pivot and still have the rest of the year, to be able to make, significant things happen. And also, it introduces, I think, a healthy sense of urgency. So you're not thinking, I'm going to do this in 6 months' time or at some point. You've got 90 days, you've got very clear goals, you've got 12 weeks, you need to just kind of, pull the trigger and keep going. So I'd say your first 30 days, you're outbound most of the time, right? So your job is to have conversations. You need to be having multiple conversations a day. And these aren't necessarily all sales conversations. These can be catch ups, some referral asks, some are just for visibility, just so that people know what you're doing. But you need to be relentless about this, right? So the biggest mistake I see with a lot of fractional people is that they hide behind a website, they make the announcement on LinkedIn, and then they're like sit down at their desk, they're like, okay, why aren't people calling me? No, you've got to put yourself in front of people. You've got to be ready to have conversations, and don't just focus online on having conversations online. I've joined a number of networking groups. Go out in person, meet people, have conversations, find out what people are doing, practice talking about what it is you now do. Then your next 30 days after that. So I've talked about the first 30 days being outbound, really focusing on having conversations. The next 30 days, you want to refine your offering and or at least your positioning if you need to, and you need to follow up. So you're going to start hearing patterns from the market. So certain problems will keep coming up, certain types of companies are more interested than others. People might tell you, well, this thing that you're talking about isn't really the problem we're having. We're having this problem over there. So it's a great opportunity to sharpen your positioning, and you're better equipped to do that if you've really engaged with people so that you can hear a broad range of perspectives and really kind of get a sense of where the market is. Follow up on every warm conversation. Most businesses are won based on continued follow up. Right. So don't just think, oh, I spoke to somebody once or I emailed them once and I followed up once and that's it. Keep following up. And then the last part of the 90 days, the last 30 days, ideally at this point, you'd have had interesting sales conversations, you'd have been able to sign up your first client, and you want to really throw yourself into this, over deliver. This isn't about working more hours than you quoted, but this is about being so strategically valuable that the client can imagine not having you. Your client is your first, your case study, your testimonial, your referral engine. So you got to treat them accordingly. But throughout, you've got to protect your energy, because one of the things that you need to be cautious of as a fractional executive is scope creep. And if you don't properly define what your scope is ahead of time, you might find that you're doing significantly more than you intended. The thing to be aware of is that your first 90 days will be an emotional roller coaster. There'll be moments where you think, oh my gosh, I have so much flexibility and autonomy. This is absolutely fantastic. People are really buying what I'm selling. This is amazing. And then there are times when you feel absolutely invincible. This person who I had 3 coffees with is not responding to my message. How rude. And so you might question everything. But remember, this is about excuse me, this is about holistically building a life around you. So make sure you have routines that keep you grounded, from your exercise to sleep to spiritual work, meditation, spending time with people that you love and people that make you feel good. This is a marathon. This isn't a sprint, right? So you've got to really be intentional about everything that you're building around the work that you're doing. So when I left, I was at a hedge fund, and I left almost a year ago now, which is even crazy to talk about. I would say that the biggest shock to my system in the almost year that I've been doing fractional work for is the identity shift. That has been the biggest shock because I'm a practical person. So I had my financial plan in order. I had, warmed up my network. I had clarity on why I was doing what I was doing and clarity on what I could market, and who my potential clients would be. I hadn't worked it out plan by plan, but I definitely had clear idea of direction of travel. What I didn't anticipate was the change in identity, because I now had to think of myself as a fractional leader. I had to think of myself as a business owner, and not an employee. And that shift is really significant and really important. And it is, I'm not unique in this. When I speak to a lot of leaders making similar transitions, this is the bit that they really kind of struggle with. So, but I would say on the flip side of that struggle is the flexibility, the variety, the fact that you don't have to take a dip overall in your income because you can build it back up really quickly being relative, right? And you have the ability to choose the kind of work you want to do and how you want to deliver. And I think overall, what I would say is that the quality of life, if you can manage your identity shift, you can manage the stresses, the quality of life is definitely higher. So I've talked about a bunch of stuff in today's video. If this resonated with you, I talk a lot about career transitions, in mid-career in financial services and technology, which is my sector. I talk a lot about this on my podcast, which is called Adapted Ambitions. It's about career reinvention for experienced people. I'll put the link in below, and you can listen actually to my first season on this channel, and also their videos similar to this setup, but with a bit more production value, I guess. Their videos where you can also watch my podcast, or you can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. So you'll see the link and you'll see the videos if you just look around my channel. If you're in the talent and recruiting space specifically, that's my world. I run Inference Talent Advisory, where I work with hedge funds and with tech companies, on exactly on talent challenges, leadership challenges, etc. Where you'll find me most often is LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn 5 times a week, and I share career transition strategies. I share talent acquisition strategies for execs as well. So come connect with me, come join me, tell me you found me on YouTube. I would love to connect and to chat. So if you're in a corporate role right now and you're wondering what's next, here it is. I hope this helps. Do it with a plan. Give yourself grace. Give yourself a proper runway so that you can be comfortable, and do it in a strategic way. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.